Guys, hope you're doing well out there and staying safe. I just want to say that this next section is going to start chapter 11, so you need to read it. Chapter 11, the early Middle Ages. But it's also the first chapter in our last test of the semester, which will be for chapters 11, 12, and 13. I'll be posting a slide list and vocab list for those chapters that you can use in this module. That's chapter 11 module. You're going to want to watch all the lectures for the chapters as well as the documentaries and the other materials that I post. You're going to want to check them out so you can stay on top of it. You need to be reading the chapter for the week, which should take you a substantial amount of time that you're supposed to be doing as part of your engagement with the course, as well as taking notes on it. So make sure you're staying up on that type of stuff so you can be successful. Also want to say, if you've had any assignments missing, like a gallery report and compare and contrast paper, which most of you just turned in, you need to make sure you get them in even if they're late. They'll drop a grade point from, like, if it would have been an A on the paper, will become a B. But you really need those points to be able to pass the course. You need to turn in all your assignments. So get those done. You have up until the last week of the regular week before finals week. That's not the finals week. Finals week is, I believe, the 18th through the 22nd or the 19th. Let me see on my calendar. Finals week is the 18th through the 22nd. So the last day you can turn in any regular coursework for this class, anything late, is May 13th. So you're going to want to do that. Okay, let's talk about the early Middle Ages. My subtitle for this is The Age of Faith, because we'll see that a lot of the work in this time is made for religious reasons, and that people's faith and the church, and even in certain part of this chapter we'll look at Islam and their areas that they're in control of, their institutions, that those different institutions are the ones that commission a lot of work and have quite a bit of power in relationship to monarchies and things like that. Okay. In the West, we had the end of the Roman Empire. We're going to be talking, but before I say that, we're going to be talking about an era that's about 480 to 1480, a really long era of 1,000 years. Most of this early Middle Ages, though, is going to be within the 7th to the end of the 10th centuries, but technically the Middle Ages is about 1,000 years long. So it's not the same in the East and the West, but the end of the Roman Empire is in the West. There's a migration. It's what they call the Dark Ages. The flavor is very, very Christian in most of the places, and there's a big emphasis on monasticism, which is religious institutions that include things like hospitals, schools, hotels, farms, vineyards, grain silos. This is the monks, and they have abbeys and huge amounts of land. So the monastic life technically is people who are, you could think of it sometimes classically out in the wilderness, living a life of barely, fasting and prayer, and that's part of it. But there's other flavors of it that include people who are doing industry, like teaching the wealthy, their children being taught. They're having hospitals and helping the sick, brewing wine, and have farms and things. They also have places where people come and stay when they're on pilgrimages, and things like that. So a pilgrimage is a journey taken for a religious reason. And during this era, there's definitely a lot of pilgrimage to places that are important for people spiritually, like shrines and important sites, as well as to go see relics, which were really important during this era. A relic was something owned or touched by a holy person or saint. For example, a finger bone of the person or an item they owned, a lot of different things. And we'll look at a bunch of reliquaries that are the objects designed to hold the relic. Another really prominent part of this this chapter, especially in the later part of this era, is feudalism. So it's a system of loyalty, not social mobility. What do I mean by that? It's not a system of justice socially for people where there's like, oh, you can move up the ranks. If you're a serf, you're not very much able to ever go up. And it's very difficult. If you're a knight, you can maybe go up a little bit or down, but not really very much. Okay. So this person, this king, is a lot of times they believe at this era a divine right that they're given their job by God, and that it's inherited through being bloodline related most of the time. Sometimes it'll happen where someone will take power and there'll be some amount of civil war and things, but a lot of times we're talking about bloodline relations in this part of the world. There's some amount of in different like Vikings and things where there's all about power is all about having a band of warriors and things, but primarily we're talking about the main and plain of it. And in this system, there's a way in which each level gives something to the level below and requires something from them. So the king gives fiefs, which is land, to his people, like the lords and bishops and things, and they're supposed to supply to him military aid. So money, and a lot of money, and knights and people to work for him and to conquer for him and to do his labor all over the world. Now those people, they give things to knights who are vassals to a lord. They give them maybe food, protection, and shelter, like a castle or a place to live, food, maybe protection and numbers. And in turn, the knights give to the people up here, this level of vassals to the king, they give them military service and homage to fight in their name and help protect their rights, their territory, and to fight for them, mostly a lot of that. And then in theory, the knights would have people that they're over, but a lot of times we could also say these people are over them. Everyone's over the layer below them, so the king is over everyone, and these people are all over the people below them, and these people are all over the people below them. In theory, the knights and lords are supposed to give protection to the peasants and give them a place to farm land and give them food and shelter. But that doesn't happen often, as much as we would like. There's not a lot of social justice, so to speak. They give them land to farm, but in the end, they end up taking a lot of money from them to pay rent and requiring them to pay a lot of food up to them and things like that. So these people are having a really, really rough time of it in this type of society. It didn't have to be that way, so to speak, but people being corrupt and wanting more and more and more all the time made it like that. If people were caring above you, then your life would be better. If they weren't, then your life would be worse. And so when you had a good king, I'm sure the whole kingdom was a lot better. If you had a bad king, then everyone was having a terrible time of it. Same with anyone below a knight. If he was a good knight, then the life was probably great. If you had a bad master, then you're talking about a terrible life. So it's very, very, very mixed bag, shall we say. So in the West, and that was the West when we're talking about all this stuff, the migration. In the East, we have a different situation, right? Because there's still the Byzantine Empire happening, and there's this other thing happening too, which is from 700 to about 1100 AD, there was a rise of an Islamic empire. Now, it's one of three monotheistic religions. Of course, we talked already about Judaism and Christianity. Well, Islam is the third main monotheistic religion in the world. So I'll give you a bit of a brief overview of that and talk about kind of how this affected part of the world that we've already looked at. Right, we've looked at the Middle East and the Near East. We've looked at areas in Jerusalem. We haven't looked too much at Spain, but I want to also point out to you in chapter 10 we talked about how this Byzantine Empire here kind of acted like a buffer. They had a lot of fighting, I should say, with the Islamic Empire. Buffer has a negative connotation, but I don't mean it necessarily in a negative way as much as the way in which these two empires interacted with each other. They held back the continued conquest of the Islamic Empire on Europe. And you can see that they continued on over this. They had to almost go around them, basically, to try to have more land. And they did end up taking over parts of Spain and conquering it. But they met over here, the Carolingian Empire. And so coming from the east directly towards the west, this Byzantine Empire, which lasted for quite a long time, up to the 1400s, we talked about 1452, there was a lot of fighting between them and the Islamic Empire. We don't get into all that, but it stopped the empire from being able to continue over Europe as easily. So let's talk a bit about the Islam as a religion to give you some kind of overview of it and look at some of the images of a few places we're going to look at in Spain, some architecture and things. In Islam, just like the other ones, this is a really brief overview. The founder was Muhammad. He was born in 570 AD in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, current Saudi Arabia. By the time he died in 632, this religion was only established in Arabia. There was a sort of aggressive campaign of conquest and conversion, and by 100 years later, it stretched from Afghanistan to Spain and southwest France, like that. So there was quite a lot of change. Islam is an Arabic word that means submission to God's will, and there's a different terms we use. Muslim is a religion, and also the adherents and the countries that they live in. So when you hear this word used in the news or different places in the world, Muslim, they mean their religion, but also they're sometimes referring to certain parts of the world where the majority of the population follows Islam. So that's just to kind of explain a little terminology. There's 5 pillars in the religion. One of them is a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life, a journey taken for a religious reason. Alms giving, so giving to the poor and people in need. 5 times a day praying towards Mecca, and then fasting during the month of Ramadan from sunrise to sunset. And then the last one is that there is no God for them but Allah, and that Muhammad is his prophet. That's what they believe, those things. They have a sacred text called the Quran, and their name for God is Allah. So that's kind of really, really basic overview of it. It differs in format from Christianity and Judaism, which we've talked about already, because they don't have a priesthood and they don't have sacraments like communion and baptism. It has caliphs, which are rulers, and imams, which are leaders in prayer. And it spiritually differs in a number of ideas between Judaism and Christianity. Like Christianity and Judaism differ quite substantially as well, because one of the main things, like we've been talking a lot about Christianity because of the artwork in these chapters, we will talk a lot about it, is things about Jesus and the resurrection. They have very differing opinions in all 3 of these religions. Things about what are sacred texts and not sacred texts for each of these religions is quite different. So different ideas, and you could study each of these religions for a whole degree course and still have more to talk about. So this is a very brief overview just to give you some context. This picture here is a Christian and Muslim playing chess as an illustration from the Book of Games in 1285. It's not on your slide list, but it kind of shows you an interesting idea about the way that there was an interaction between these people. And there's a lot of contributions that Islam had to the West. They preserved the classics during the time of upheaval with established universities. They copied the writings of the Greek and Romans. They had a big impact on astronomy and navigation. It is important for the next age of exploration. Medicine, art. We'll see in the art an importance on calligraphy, the avoidance of human forms, and led to like some really beautiful floral and geometric ornamentation. Sculpture wasn't existent because they believed it was evil because of some of those reasons. Architecture flourished because of that, and there were some beautiful places of worship made. And then one of the most important things for our next chapters that they contributed was a pointed arch that we find in chapter 12 in Gothic Europe. So let's look at this building called the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. It's one that you're supposed to find an image of online. It's not in your textbook, but it's in most art history textbooks, so I want you guys to have an understanding of it. It's in Jerusalem. It's Islamic. It's from 600 AD. This is it from a little ways away. The original function and significance of it are a bit uncertain, depending on which sources you talk to. The building is not a mosque, albeit people often have said that maybe, but it does not fit easily into other categories of Muslim religious architecture. They think most likely it was a shrine to the taking of Jerusalem, which is commonly held that the dome commemorates the Prophet Muhammad's ascension into heaven. The night journey of Muhammad, the angel Gabriel came to Muhammad while he slept near Kaaba in Mecca and took him to the farthest mosque in Jerusalem, and from the rock he journeyed to heaven. This is a quote, where he met other prophets such as Moses. So, and saw God enthroned and encircled by angels. So there's this idea that this is the place, the rock. The construction appears to predate that tradition, though. So, identifying Jerusalem as a site, people say the construction's earlier than that. So there's been some disagreement about that idea. And another part to that maybe says maybe this isn't true, but a later thing added onto it is that none of the inscriptions in the building make reference to the episode. So Christians and Muslims in the Middle Ages believed the Dome of the Rock to be the Temple of Solomon, or the rock that Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac on. It's a really beautiful building. It has, like you can see, this is a diagram, a lot of gorgeous tiles around it on the outside in this beautiful dome. But there's a lot of detail we'll look at in these glazed ceramic tiles. The Knights Templar were quartered here in following the conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusader army in 1099, and the dome was used as a church until a Muslim army recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. So it's had different purposes over the years. There's amazing glazed ceramic tiles all over and gold on the outside of the dome. It's also made of marble, woods, and stone. And it has an interesting floor plan. We're looking at the inside of it, but let me go back real quick to the floor plan. In a way, you could say it's similar to San Vitale we looked at in chapter 10, like a centrally planned church. The structure is positioned near the center of a wide raised platform, and it has an octagonal base. So this is the base I'm talking about. It has 8 sides to it. It's topped by a gilded wooden central dome. It's like a rotunda and then a dome. So it's octagonal, then a circular drum, and then a dome on top. It's known as a type of it's related to a composition relates to Byzantine religious buildings known as martyrium. So they're kind of shrines erected to mark the graves of saints or to commemorate events of special religious significance, like we're talking about. This drum is approximately 65 feet in diameter, so all the way around, and is mounted on the dome, is 65 feet in diameter, and it's mounted on this drum. And then it's elevated up here by these columns. If you see there, they have Corinthian capitals on them. So it's got 24 piers and columns, and below the dome is this portion of sacred rock exposed and protected by the railing. It is actually in the location of Solomon's temple that was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, so that's why probably a lot of people believed it to be the Temple of Solomon originally. And you can see here the exposed rock. I want to just show you that ground plan elevation again real quick to give you an idea of what we're talking about. It's right there in the middle of it all. The interior and exterior of the structure are decorated really beautifully with marble mosaics and metal plaques. You can see that the columns are marble. There's like gorgeous details all over throughout it. And there's mosaics that are similar in technique to those found in the Byzantine era, public buildings and churches. The one main difference, a huge main difference, I should say, is that they exclude any representations of human or animal forms, which we know from the Byzantine era. You can see on the outside here the same thing. Byzantine era, they were happily putting humans in their mosaics and doing huge mosaics of people like their emperors, like Justinian's mosaic and things. Instead, they have Arabic script and like vegetal patterns, like vegetable leaf-like things, intermixed with images of things like jewels and crowns all over the whole outside and the inside. You can see some of that geometric pattern, gorgeous, and this is script up here. So really beautiful lyrical line. And there's Arabic inscriptions that run around the octagonal arcade. So that's on the outside of the building. And on the inside, I believe there's some as well. So that's the basics of this building. It's really interesting and kind of similar to those other Byzantine class of buildings I talked about, but also very particular and not exactly like any of the other things we've seen. The next structure we're going to look at is called Prayer Hall. We're going to look at the Prayer Hall of the Great Mosque in Spain. And I want to show you the slide that shows where we are here. This is where we're looking at in the world. The last thing we were looking at was in Jerusalem, way over here. So we're kind of looking at a wide range of the whole empire between these buildings. So we're going to look at the prayer hall of the Great Mosque. It's from 800 AD, so we're moving on about 200 years, which is a long period in history. Really, not our whole country has not been around for that much more than 200 years, like 230 years. So this is a big jump in time. We're looking at a building that is elaborate and also a good example of a traditional mosque with principles of design and incorporations of, but it also incorporates like regional forms to it. It's built in Spain by the first Muslim ruler of Spain. By 1200, northern Spanish kings were pushing the Muslims out of Spain, and by 1500 it was converted to a Catholic church, so it's no longer a mosque. It's rectangular in its structure with a courtyard, and the prayer hall is the most important room in the mosque. So this is sort of a ground plan of the whole thing here. You can see that this is that courtyard. The minaret is a place where they call the faithful to prayer, outdoor area, and this prayer hall is what we're going to look at. It's very elaborate, and this area here, this is the most important area of the most important area, shall we say. So that's the outside of it. This is what it looks like as a ground plan. We're going to look next at some slides of the inside of it and talk a bit about the design of it as a whole. And the next video that'll be part 2 of chapter 11. So take care, guys. I'll talk to you soon. And if you have questions, please email me.